So, Keith Lowe, welcome to the briefing room.
It's lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Welcome. And today we're going to talk about Naples 1944. This was excellent. I found it disturbing. I found it dark. And if you're very sensitive, don't read it because it does go into a lot of detail about some really dark things. But at the center of it were the people of Naples, and they were the light amongst all the darkness. So it was a really good read, and I really feel for the people of Naples in that. Um, my first question, I guess, is why this particular period of time and why Naples?
Right. Okay. There's a lot to unpack there, probably. I mean, Naples is a place that I've known since I was a kid. So, sort of it's deep in me, I suppose.
Mhm.
I've got a real love for that city. I think it's my favorite city in the world, to be honest. Um, and that the period of the Second World War is that's my period. The thing I always do in my books is I don't look at the fighting and the sort of tanks rolling in and um the what the soldiers are doing on the front. What I like looking at is the effects that come afterwards. Because war doesn't just sort of stop and everything goes back to normal. It has huge and very long-lasting effects. So those are the things I'm interested in. And Naples I mean, it's the first city which is liberated by the Western Allies on the whole of the mainland of the continent. So it becomes a kind of template for what's going to happen all over Europe in the 18 months which follow. So for all those reasons, I mean, Naples seemed like an obvious choice, really. And plus, it was a great excuse to go and spend a lot of time there, which is if you're spending your life researching, you need to be researching in a place you like.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. And what can you tell us a little bit about Naples before the war started?
Yeah, I mean, how far back do you want to go? Just
Well, just before the war started,
okay.
what was the city like in
Yeah,
the early
okay. I mean, the reason I
1940s?
ask is just because it's one of the oldest cities in Europe. It's like
Yeah.
3,000 years old. It's well predates Rome. Um, so yeah, in the years running up to the war, it was. I mean, the fascists were in control,
Mhm.
uh, and I mean, I look, you'll know from the book that I don't have much sympathy for the fascists.
Yeah.
Um, but that said, in a kind of way, they did. They gave Naples a feeling of sort of hope because Naples has been a very impoverished city for centuries, especially since the Italian unification. It was really poor. They had all kinds of uh, like famine, cholera epidemics, all that sort of thing. Um, the fascists arrive in the 20s and they start sort of bigging up Naples, saying we're going to make Naples great again, you could say. And yeah, they give it a sort of sense of its identity as like this city at the center of the Mediterranean.
Mhm.
The fascists are going to make this the new center of their Mediterranean empire. And that gives a real sense of pride suddenly to the people of the city. So even though there's a huge amount of resistance to the fascists going on, it's a very working class city. There are a lot of communists who hate the fascists for obvious reasons. There is also this sort of other side of it of, this is our opportunity for greatness. Mussolini's coming, he's going to make our city great. So
Hmm.
you got both sides of that coin going on at the same time.
And what was Hitler's response to the the taking down of Mussolini, the fall of Mussolini, and the changing of sides of Italy?
Right, yeah. So in the summer of 1943, the war's not going well, especially for Italy. Sicily's already been invaded. They've had terrible disasters in North Africa. Hundreds of thousands of Italian soldiers have been captured. and taken by the Allies to prisoner of war camps. So the war's not going well for Italy. The Allies are knocking on the door. And so the Italian government realize, they've got to do something about it. They've got to get rid of Mussolini and they've got to swap sides.
Mhm.
So they do this in late July 43. And Hitler is incensed. This is his major ally now beginning to show that they're kind of looking at switching sides. And they've got rid of Mussolini, Mussolini was the inspiration for Hitler. It was Mussolini's March on Rome in 1920, which inspired Hitler to try and do the same thing in Germany.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's a feeling that there is a betrayal coming, and so the Nazis start making plans for taking over Italy when that betrayal finally does come. They know it's coming, and they plan for it.
And they have to suffer. The people of Naples have to suffer German occupation and the Allied bombing. How did that make the people feel? Were they fighters and fought back, or did they act like a defeated people?
Well, I mean, yeah, Naples was the most bombed city in all of Italy. So they had bombing raids happening all the time, quite devastating ones.
Mhm.
Uh, they were quite defiant about that. I mean, they weren't on the same scale as something like Hamburg or Dresden, fairly early on in the war, and it was mostly localized on the port. Um, so they were able to sort of weather that storm. But when the Germans took over, beginning of September, that was something altogether different. I mean, that was they started blowing up everything systematically. They blew up all the port, they blew up all um, the electricity stations, the telephone exchanges. I mean, everything,
Yeah.
and took over the city. And then they started rounding up the people to take away as slave labor. So, uh, yeah, the people of Naples weren't going to take that lying down. So they rose up. I mean, first of all, they rose up immediately when the Germans took over, and that was disastrous. Um, all the top brass of the military kind of caved in, so it was left to junior officers to try and to stand up to the might of the German army
Mhm.
with predictable results. I mean, some pretty terrible atrocities happened. But later on, when the Allies were sort of getting closer to Naples, the whole city rose up. And this was in response to the Germans they started rounding up all the men to try and take them
Mhm.
away. And that was just the last straw. So the entire city rose up against the Germans. They built barricades in the streets. They looted police stations to get arms. And then you got men, women, and children on the barricades firing at the Germans. So and it worked. They eventually kicked them out. Before the Allies arrived, the
Mhm.
people of Naples liberated themselves. It's really quite inspiring.
And was this the 4 days of Naples?
This is called the 4 Days of
Yeah.
Naples, yeah, end of September that year.
And what was the major difference between that in something like the Warsaw Uprising?
I mean, the Warsaw Uprising is a very similar kind of thing. It's a citywide uprising. I mean, the
Mhm.
difference there is that that's happening a year later. It's much more famous, the
Yeah.
Warsaw
Yeah. Yeah.
Uprising. But Naples was there first. And it's very similar in that, in Warsaw you had the Russian army knocking on the door, so the people rose up against the Germans to prevent them destroying the city. The difference is that the Soviets didn't enter the city for a couple of months. So the Germans could carry on destroying everything and rounding up the population, and it didn't end up being this successful thing. In Naples, the Allies carried on rolling into the city, and so the uprising was successful, basically.
Yeah, and I found it really disturbing that they planted booby traps everywhere,
Oh, yes, yes.
which just destroyed the city and killed a lot of people. And that that to me, how you described that was really upsetting to me.
Yeah, and upsetting to the people at the time. I mean, you
Mhm.
imagine, you think, hooray, we're liberated, we're free.
Yeah.
And then, 5 or 6 days later, time bombs start going off And
Yeah.
the big one was in the post office, which was set to go off in the middle of the day when it would be at its most crowded. This is there has no bearing on the war. It's a purely malicious thing to do to make as many casualties as possible. I mean, it's horrendous thing.
Yeah. You describe a woman coming around the corner and having her head blown off,
Yeah,
and somebody putting a man together so his wife wouldn't see the bits of him all over the place.
yeah.
And yeah, that was, ugh, it was awful. And when the Allies come into Naples, what is their primary objective
I mean,
initially?
they're fighting a war, so they just want to they want to get Naples back up and running and use its resources to help win the war. So they're not necessarily focusing on the civilian population and sort of getting them back up and running,
Mm,
apart from the fact that they need the city to be functioning. Um, so they make sure there's water, they make sure the electricity's back on. The most important thing is to get the port back up and running because they need to supply their army.
yeah.
And that ends up being really important for the people as well, because the port is the only way of getting food into the city at that point. So two birds with one stone, I suppose.
Thank you. Um, your book suggests the Allies were ill prepared. How did that exasperate the problem, the bad planning? How did that exasperate the problem for the people of the city?
Yeah, I mean, they the Allies were, I mean, they were good at planning for war. I mean, that's their job, is
Yeah.
to fight a war. But they really thought that when they arrived in Naples, it would be able to look after itself. It's surrounded by all this incredible fertile land, which is fed by Vesuvius, this volcanic landscape, which has the most amazing vegetables growing there. Anybody who goes to Naples and eats the pizza will know how good the tomatoes are there, for example. Um, and so it has this reputation of being this sort of land of plenty. But of course, it's just been destroyed, this city. All the transport systems have been destroyed. So there's no way of getting food into the city. And the Allies just really didn't plan for this at all. They just thought, we'll bring in enough food for the first sort of week or so, and then things will just look after themselves. But of course they didn't. And people started
No.
to starve, and all the terrible social consequences of starvation also came alongside the famine.
But that made me really angry, actually, talking about food, because the people on the street were starving, yet the Allies were having banquets.
Yeah.
And surely on a humane level, that shouldn't go on.
Yeah. I mean, it is infuriating. I mean, imagine being one of the people in Naples seeing that going on, seeing
Yeah.
the wealth disparity going on. The lowliest British soldier was hundreds of times more wealthy in terms of food
Mm,
than even rich, supposedly rich, sort of nobility in
yeah.
Naples. You Middle class people were reduced to begging, selling everything they owned in order to put food on the table.
Mm,
Um, but from the Allied point of view, they're fighting a war. They've got to keep their men healthy. So whatever's happening to the civil population, they are going to feed their men well. They've got to keep their morale up. Because if you're standing in a wet trench around Casino somewhere, being shelled all day, and you go
mm.
on leave to Naples, you don't want to, be on sort of minimum rations. You want to have a good time, get your spirits back up. So the Allies were focusing on that, not
Mm.
on looking after the civilian population. So that's where the disparity comes from.
And do you think that disparity um, was exasperated by the fact that the Italians used to be the enemy and had only just joined the Allied forces?
Yeah, there was a a lot of distrust there, especially at the
Mm,
beginning. The Allies had been fighting the Italians in North Africa, and there was a resentment
Mm,
to these people. Suddenly they've changed sides, but have they really? You know, are they
yeah.
really on our side? But I think most people understood that after a while, after they've been amongst these people, that they're just ordinary people. They don't know what's going on with the war. They're just trying to just trying to survive like anybody else. You know, there was one guy um, who he was interviewed by the Imperial War Museum, who he was quite resentful. This is British guy who working in the um, like the supply battalions. He was working in the post office, and he got really angry with these damn Italian workers who were there, who thought were lazy. They were sort of falling asleep on the job, and he just thought, you know, these Italians are taking us for a ride.
Mm,
It was only when he realized that the reason they're falling asleep on the job is because during the day they're working on the trams for full time, and then they come and they have a second job all night in the post office depot with them. So they didn't have any time to sleep. There was no sleep to be had. These poor guys were trying whatever they could just to put food on the table. And
yeah.
after that, he softened and began to respect them and love them.
And after after all that they've suffered through the war, then the German occupation, the Allies come in. It's really biblical, this book. It seems that way. They then suffer a typhus epidemic.
Yeah, yeah.
And how did the Allied forces help with the containment of that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a sort of it's a very mixed tale. We all remember the epidemic, the COVID pandemic
Yeah,
that we went through.
yeah.
Well, imagine that, but like on a very intense local scale, while there's a war going on around you and you're living in ruins.
Mm,
I mean, the one of the major problems in Naples is there's no fresh water. The Germans have blown up all the water mains before
mm,
they've gone, and they've also blown up all the sewers. So the water that there is getting all mixed up. Nobody knows, you know, which is clean water and which isn't. So at the beginning, the Allies have to feed everybody with water from water trucks. You
mm,
queue up with a bottle, and you're allowed 2 bottles each per day, and that's all you get. So, you know, there's not a lot of washing going on. So
yeah.
people, you know, talk about the smell everywhere, and there's no rubbish collections where there's no hygiene. So there's a lot of waste on the streets. Naples smells terrible, and the people smell terrible, and they're living often, you know, they've been bombed out of their houses. So you've got literally tens of thousands of people living in bomb shelters and in tunnels and in
Mm,
caves. I mean, they're basically living like cavemen for months after the liberation. They've got nowhere to wash and nowhere to clean themselves. So this is a place where the lice which spread typhus are having a field day. In
mm,
overcrowded spaces, they can jump from body to body, and yeah, everybody is infested with lice. So typhus begins to spread. At first, the Allies kind of ignore it and say, "No, no, it's not really happening." But then, so many cases are coming up, they realise something has to be done. And because they've left it late, everything has to be done at a hurry and in an emergency. So they call in some typhus epidemics from the US, and sorry, some typhus experts from the US.
mm,
And these guys, I mean, it's incredible how quickly they go into action. And suddenly resources are thrown at this in a way which, you know, would have been better if they'd done it at the start, but nevertheless, they're doing it. They dust the entire population of Naples with insecticide powder in the next like
mm,
6 weeks, 2 months. That's 1 million people they managed to dust with this powder. It kills all the insects and stops this epidemic in its tracks. It's incredible.
mm.
It was hailed as a sort of medical miracle at the time. They wrote it up in all the medical journals because it was the first time anyone had done this. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was a sort of like a biblical plague, which somehow the Allies managed to control.
It like I say, we'll get on to uh, Mount Vesuvius later, but it is very biblical. Your book. It's one thing after another, after another, after another, and that's what made me really feel for the people in Naples. because they just don't get a break
Yeah,
at all.
yeah. Yeah, first of all, it's famine, then it's typhus, and then it's the bombing going on.
Yeah.
Then there's an economic crisis, and then Vesuvius erupts. I mean, it's just one thing after another.
And it is. I don't know why this hasn't been given more attention. Um, do have you any idea why it's not been given more attention?
People focus on World War II as a military thing,
Mm,
and so they follow the military history of the war, and they just don't tend to follow what happens behind the military. What happens next after the military have moved on. It's something we've always done.
mm.
We remember VE Day as like, hooray, the end of the war, and suddenly everything somehow gets back to normal. Well, of course it
Yeah,
doesn't.
yeah, yeah,
Europe's in ruins for years afterwards.
yeah, yeah. And it uh, doesn't paint the Allies in a good light either, with all
Yeah,
the mistakes they made in
yeah.
how they
And
behaved.
it's a sort of it's not comfortable for British and American people to remember. We like to think of the war as something, good versus evil, and we're
Yeah,
on the good side, and we are on the good side. But we're not all heroes and saints. We make mistakes, and there were lots of mistakes made in Naples. Um, Tragic
yeah.
mistakes.
And one of the things that made me very sad about reading it was when I got to your chapter on prostitution.
Yeah, that was
And
that was tough to research, I have to say.
yeah, I bet. There was a couple of things that really stuck in my mind, and one of them was a line of soldiers, and at the front of the line was a man taking money and a woman on a mattress.
Yeah,
That I was just heartbroken when I heard that, and worse than even that. Sorry, listeners who are sensitive, but worse than even that was the girl who'd got an 11-year-old sister, and she passed out on the sixth man, and then people just stood around watching her,
yeah,
and that was heartbreaking.
yeah.
It really was.
And what makes it even more shocking is that this is not an unusual thing.
Damn.
It's all
No.
over Naples, and
Mm.
the people, the men who are involved are quite matter of fact about it. They're not, they're not trying to hide the fact. They find it's just almost like it's a sort of interesting curiosity. And that there are some people who actually written in their memoirs, oh, well, I thought I'd try her out. Never tried a young girl before. It's really sickening
It is.
the
Now,
way it's so sort of casual.
and I'm just thinking, when I was reading it, I was just thinking, why? Why are you doing this? You know how wrong it is. And I don't know whether I don't know, they're getting sex any way they can before they go off and may be killed, or what. But it was just so wrong. It's such a deep human level.
Yeah,
I don't know why anybody would do this. And I know you talk about one guy who just openly admits that he slept with a 12-year-old girl.
yeah.
And
I mean, the thing is, look, most Allied soldiers didn't do this. I have to
no,
say
no,
that.
yeah,
But
yeah,
but in any society, you're going to get a percentage of people who don't really care. They'll just try anything. Uh, um, the the problem with war in any guise anywhere is that it sweeps away all the societal norms which put a lid on that
yeah,
and makes it okay. Who's going to stop them? Nobody's going to stop them. So
yeah.
why not give it a try? Do you see?
That's a really, really disturbing way of thinking, though, isn't it?
Yeah. But
For
unfortunately, that's the way it is. And you get this in
yeah,
any war situation. Once
yeah,
all the police forces have been swept away and the societal norms have been swept away, for a
mm,
while you have chaos where kind of anybody with a gun can do whatever they like. And you
yeah.
see the same things happening, I'm sure, in Syria and Gaza and so on today.
Oh, yeah. I mean, people talk about the the Germans and the Russians raping during World War II, and the Japanese. Everybody did it.
Yeah,
Everybody did it. There was a section of British who did it, French, Americans. Everybody did it, and everybody turned. Not everybody, like you say, but there's a section of people who turn into animals.
yeah.
It's
And
quite
this is why we
disturbing.
have police forces. This is why we have
Yeah,
institutions
yeah,
and sort of we make these structures in our life to try and keep a lid on these sort of dark human forces within us that are within every society.
mm,
Uh, the reason why, the Russian rape, the sort of Soviet rape of Germany and Austria and Hungary was worse was simply because the superior officers didn't try and keep a lid on it. They kind of
yeah,
said, "Oh, it's just the men enjoying themselves," and gave them free reign. The
mm,
reason why the Western allies weren't so bad is that the senior officers didn't do that. They tried to keep a lid on everything.
yeah,
So it will still happen, but not to the same degree. It's those societal constraints. If they're
yeah.
removed, then terrible things happen.
Makes you wonder about like human nature altogether, doesn't it?
Yeah,
But
it does.
how did the officers try and stop that in Naples?
I mean, there were various constraints. So for example, in Naples there were licensed brothels. They always
Mm,
had been. Um, the British authorities made those off limits to British soldiers. So they were any British soldier caught going into a brothel could be arrested.
mm,
The Americans didn't. They allowed their men to do whatever they liked in the brothels as long as it was in there. Um, so even within the Western Allies, you have this disparity of some people being allowed and others not. Um, but yeah, as far as policing the age of the girls that were in these brothels,
mm,
and also remember, this is not just happening in brothels. This is happening in the streets. It's happening in people's homes. If you've got a starving population, everybody's turning to prostitution. They
yeah.
estimated around 40,000 part-time prostitutes in Naples during
Wow.
1944.
Wow. And it was sad to see that like there was boys who were offering their mothers and their sisters,
Yeah,
and yeah,
yeah.
it was awful. Um, there was widespread looting of Allied weaponry as well. And how did this contribute to the atmosphere of unlawfulness and violence?
Well, there was widespread looting of everything.
Yeah.
I mean, Naples has always been famous as a place where you get your pocket picked, or sometimes be beaten up and stripped of all your clothes. And there are lots of instances where Allied officers or Allied soldiers are led away into the streets by one of these little boys who's saying, come and find my mother. She's the best in town. They get led down these dark alleys and then beset upon by these by people who then strip them of absolutely everything, so they're
Mm,
completely stark naked, and then they have to make their way home to base with nothing. So there's quite a few instances of that happening, but more generally, there is theft from the port, theft from the backs of Allied lorries.
mm,
Mostly people are trying to get hold of food, but anything that could be sold will be stolen. And if you can get your hands on weapons, and that's great because that makes the job even easier next time round. So yes,
mm.
there was a lot of that going on.
Yeah, and it made me laugh that like little kids were jumping on the backs of lorries and climbing in and nicking stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, there is a tragic side to that as well because yeah, this was a sort of famous thing to do. The kids would run after the lorries, jump on the back, and
Mm,
and throw the cargo off the back of it, and all his mates down below would
yeah.
scamper behind, gathering up all the stuff. But the Allies kind of quickly realized that this was happening, so they placed guards in the back of the vans.
Mm,
And then when the kids jumped up onto the tailplate, they hacked at their hands with the bayonets, and so you ended up severing fingers and things like that. So yeah,
Yeah.
that kind of put a stop to the little kids doing it so much.
And after all this, Mount Vesuvius erupts.
Yes, yes,
As if they haven't had enough. And it erupts in March 1944.
yes.
And what is the impact on the city that's already crippled by war?
Well, I mean, Vesuvius is quite far from the city, so it doesn't. I mean, you don't get sort of lava flows coming into the city or anything like
Hmm.
that. But it affects all the villages on the slopes of the mountain, and most importantly, the farmland. I mean, there was
Yeah.
so much ash and smoke, and little pebbles being blown into the air by this exploding mountain that it covers all the crops for miles and miles around. Which, at a time when the city's already starving, the
Yeah.
last thing you need is for all the crops to be ruined by this eruption. So yeah, it had a big effect in that way, but it also had a sort of psychological effect. It really felt like the end of the war is
Mm.
end of the world is coming with the exploding mountain. And um, the Neapolitans have this, their patron saint is San Gennaro, who's protects them from the fire and brimstone of the mountain. So all the people are bringing out their images of the saints and holding them up to the mountain to try and sort of ward off the coming disaster.
Yeah, this the smoke and the ash that like stopped machinery
Yeah.
and
It
everything,
got
did it?
into
It
it
just
got into all the aircraft
everything.
engines. It stopped.
Yeah.
A whole squadron was wiped out. Had to just bin the planes because they couldn't fly anymore. There was no way of cleaning it out of the engines. So yeah, that's happening to the machinery. It's happening everywhere. There were some places where the ash and dust was sort of blown into drifts 10 feet
Yeah.
high, so
Yeah.
um, yeah. And people, the people who died during this explosion weren't from like being caught in the lava flows or anything. It's because they were sheltering inside, afraid, and there's so much ash and stone piled up on top of their roofs that the roofs collapsed on top of them. So that's where the deaths came.
Yeah. It's like when I got to that, I was like, "Ugh, not somewhere else." And I can imagine how the people felt.
Yeah.
And what was the role? We've talked about lawlessness. What was the role of the black market that played in Naples society?
Yeah, no, the black market is, I mean, this is a sort of another double-edged thing.
Mm.
Because you know, the only way to get food in a place which is starving is on the black market. So there's this massive pilfering that goes on. At the beginning of 1944, um, Naples is the biggest port in the world by this
Mm.
point. They're trying to feed the war in Italy by bringing vast amounts of cargo. 30% of it never makes it to the warehouse. That's how much is pilfered along the way. It
Wow.
arrives on the dock, and it's supposed to be by the time it gets to the warehouse, 30% of it's gone. Where? How? How did? And so uh, so you have this sort of massive levels of crime going on, which everybody frowns upon naturally. But on the other hand, it's the only way that food is getting onto the market for people to eat. So, all these tins of food which are supposed to be going to the front are actually being pilfered and being used to feed the local population. I mean, people have to pay through the nose for it, but on the other
Yeah.
hand, it is at least getting to the people somehow in the end.
And how do people afford it
Well,
if the prices are so high?
yeah, yeah. How did people? Well, they sold everything they had. I mean, there were you what you ended up with is this sort of massive income inequalities. Whereas
Mm.
before everybody was sort of earning vaguely around the same as each other, suddenly you got very poor people and incredibly rich people. The
Mm.
stories of people who lived in like these sort of basement slums who suddenly have suitcases full of money because they've been, doing what people on the lower edges of society do best. They're making making money out of wherever it comes from. And if that's
Yeah.
crime, great. And if it's the black market, wonderful. Suddenly they have these suitcases full of cash they don't know what to do with. And they're actually measuring, they don't know how to count the money. So they're measuring it in kilograms. They'll say, I have a kilogram of 100 lira notes.
Wow.
And they take it to the bank. I don't know how much this is. Just, put it in an account for me. So the people who really suffer are actually not the street dwellers and the sort of low level uh people who are normally on the fringes. It's the middle classes who've
Mm.
got static salaries working in sort of offices or wherever, that their salary is not going up, but inflation is running riot. I mean, we were talking sort of thousands of percent rises in prices.
Wow.
So that suddenly they can't afford anything.
Yeah.
The only way they can make any money is by selling what they've got. So you have these middle class families out in the street selling their furniture, selling their clothes, their jewelry, of course, if they've got any.
Mm.
And you end up with families who have sold everything. There's nothing left. And that's why
Jeez.
you end up with all this prostitution, because
Yeah.
that's the only thing you got left to sell.
Wow.
And the people with the money are the allies.
Yeah.
So they're coming in. They've got loads of money to spare, because a lot of them have been fighting for months on end. They've got all this back pay saved up. Now they've got nothing to spend it on, so they come to Naples and they have a splurge. They buy everything, and that's where the money comes from, which feeds this income disparity.
Yeah, because if the allies are coming in and buying up everything and taking over everything, then the people who had hardly anything to begin with have got even less then.
Yeah, yeah,
In
exactly.
and all the allies are thinking is, I'm going to enjoy myself and before I go off and possibly get killed.
Yeah. I mean, on the other hand, you got, people making a lot of money from the Allies doing things like personal services, shoe shine. There were shoe shine boys everywhere.
Mm.
Uh, there were barbers. People would like massage your shoulders for you for $1, that kind of thing. And so, personal. You got this a city of industry suddenly becomes a city of services, and the people they're
Mm.
servicing are the allies.
Yeah.
So people are abandoning their traditional occupations in order to go where the money is, which is to look after allied soldiers.
Doesn't that leave a gap though, if they're leaving industries to go into ser- servicing of the allies?
Yeah,
There's a gap then in that industry, surely.
yeah. Well, remember, lots of the industries have been destroyed.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so the allies are now supplying everything rather than local people supplying it. And that becomes a massive problem after the war is over, and the Allies they don't need to be in Naples anymore. They go, and suddenly, there's no industry, there's no allies to service, there's
Mm.
nothing. There's a vacuum, and then the economy takes a massive nosedive immediately after the war.
Wow. It never stops for the people in Naples.
Yeah.
And how did the Allies bring new reforms to the political system, and what effects did that have on the community?
Yeah, I mean, this is another tale of woe, unfortunately. Um, uh, although it has got some good sides too. I mean, the Allies turn up and they ostensibly they have ousted the fascists, but not really.
Mhm.
Because the guy who's taken over from Mussolini is this old military man. He's called Marshal Badoglio, and he is basically a fascist. He's been with Mussolini all the way through the 1920s and 30s, and so now that he's in charge, well, it's still an authoritarian kind of Italian government, and everybody hates him. Everybody wants to get rid of him. But for the Allies, he's quite useful. He's
Mm.
sort of he represents some kind of stability. They don't really want to introduce elections or anything. There's a war going on. The last thing they need is loads of social disruption. So they keep him in power. They on a local level they try and remove loads of fascist mayors and so on and install new people. But then, they move on and hand power back over to the Italian, this Marshal Badoglio, and all he and his administration do is they just reinstate all the old fascists again. So, for all the good intentions of the Allies to remove these people, it doesn't work. And then, you end up with a situation after the war where this is now entrenched. You can't really get rid of these people. They've reinvented themselves, call themselves Christian Democrats or whatever, but they're still the same people in charge.
Yeah, and it just leaves the people suffering again, and I just don't think the Allies understand the whole community, do they? They don't understand what the people need.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are people clamoring for some kind of democracy.
Mm,
They have. There's pictures in the book of this massive demonstration, tens of thousands of people on the streets of Naples, saying, "Look, we just want democracy. We want to get a chance to get rid of these people who've been
mm,
have ruined our country." And they're just not going to be allowed it. Then they don't really allow there's five or six political parties at the time. The communists, of course, and you've got the social democrats, and you've got Christian Democrats, and various other groups
mm,
who form a kind of coalition, saying, okay, we all disagree with one another, but at least we all agree that we want to be democratic, we want to have
yeah.
elections and so on. But they're not allowed to be in charge. They're not allowed to take over until after the Allies have got to Rome, which is a year, it's a year later.
Mm,
So they're left with this sort of failing, undemocratic system. And there are all these chances along the way. I'll give you one example. There's this guy called he was a sort of lawyer, minor nobility. He was called Baron Carlo de Bellis.
mm,
And he convinced the Allies that he wasn't a fascist. He'd been imprisoned by the fascists. He was a political prisoner. Well, it turned out he was a fascist, and they put him in prison because he was a thief and a fraudster,
mm,
actually. So after he'd been in charge under the Allies for a bit, they suddenly realised, oh, this guy's not what he says he is. So they want to remove him. Um, so he then goes to the Christian Democrats and says, no, no, I'm a Christian Democrat now. So they take him on and say, yeah, he's our candidate. And then the Christian Democrats realize, oh no, hang on, he's this fraudster. So they kick him out. And so then he goes to the Communist Party. And he basically works his way through every single party until finally he's re-elected as the mayor. And then the Allies want to remove him again, but they realize that the only alternative to him now is the communist candidate. And the communist candidate was also an ex-fascist anyway. So what difference does it make? You can't get
yeah.
these guys. They're always going to be in charge.
And can we talk a little bit about the writing of the book now?
Yeah, yeah.
And what was some of the greatest challenges doing the research for this, well, fairly little known subject?
Well, the major challenge to begin with was the fact that I just signed the contract. I was about to start, and suddenly the pandemic hit, and
Oh, wow.
all the archives closed, the British Library closed, and I wasn't allowed to travel. So that kind of put the kibosh on the research for the first year. But after that, um, I mean, was no more challenging than any other book I had done, apart from, well, I'll say two things. Firstly, the research into the prostitution. Um, it's very difficult to come by
Mm,
statistics, stories, because for obvious reasons, the women of the time don't really want to tell their story.
mm,
And with the men who were involved in sleeping with prostitutes, it's not always the sort of thing you'd want your
yeah.
grandchildren to hear about. But by doing a lot of digging, especially in American archives, you can find these things eventually. And there are lots of memoirs where people do admit to what they got up to while they were in
Mm,
Naples. The thing that I was sad about though is that the female voice is missing in this. You know,
yeah,
all the stories of these terrible things which are happening to women and girls are really coming from the male point of view because nobody's gone and interviewed these women, and if they have, they haven't told their stories.
yeah.
So, and I tried really for months and months to find stuff from the female point of view. I had there's a wonderful historian in Italy called Isabella Insolvibile, who's a local, and she looked for me as well, and she just couldn't find any first-hand accounts from women. So yeah, that
I
if
understand
anybody's
that.
listening who wants a proper research project, a PhD subject, for example, that needs doing, and it should be done quickly before all these people have died, have gone,
Yeah,
passed on.
yeah. I don't blame that though.
No,
You know, it's not something that you feel good talking about, is it? So,
no, no. But
but
it did make me feel slightly uncomfortable. You know, here I am,
yeah,
bloke telling stories of blokes when actually all the victims of this are all female.
yeah.
So I think it needs a young female historian to go out and interview as many women as possible to make
But
this
to,
happen.
but what your writing, how you wrote it, was very uh, sympathetic to the victims, what I would call victims of that.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. How, given the sensitivity of things like the black market and especially prostitution, what was your process to ensure a humane and balanced narrative?
Yeah, that's difficult because you know, these are really dark things,
Mm,
parts of sort of human nature, and I don't want to give the impression that it's something that all Allied soldiers were doing, for example, you know, because there will be thousands still alive who will say, "Hang on, I was in Naples, and you know, nobody I know dabbled in this."
yeah,
And they'd be right, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't widespread because it was very widespread. And you don't get 40,000 prostitutes in a city without there being a market
yeah,
for them.
true.
So yeah, um, to show balance, you've just got to be sensitive, you know,
Mm,
um, and weigh up all the different stories from all the different sources. Yeah, and when whenever you're telling any story, you have to have lots of examples to make sure it's not just an outlier. You know, you've got to statistically, you've got to pick stories that are representative of what's going on, not just so yeah, there's a sort of methodological aspect to this. But yeah, I just think being sort of psychologically sensitive to the issues involved.
and I think that does come across in the book. I think it's very um, matter of fact. These things happen, but it is sensitively written, I think. And what is the biggest myth that you aim to dispel in the book?
Um, well, I mean, there are sort of micro myths and there are sort of big myths. I mean, the myth of uh, first of all that the Allies liberated Naples.
Mm,
I mean, they did. The liberation of Naples would not have happened were the Allies not there knocking at the door already.
mhm,
But it was the people of Naples
yeah.
who liberated themselves. Um, I, there is this sense in Italy, especially that uh, the the partisans, you know, the resistance, all happened in the north of the country, and the south really there wasn't any. And this is a complete demonstration that that's not true.
Mm.
Naples was the first, and it was a whole city which rose up. So, you know, uh, take that, Bologna. Naples was there first. Um, so there was that. But then you get these sort of mini myths. There's a very famous and beautifully written memoir by Norman Lewis, which is called Naples 44, very similar title to my book. And that's a classic, and it's an absolute classic. But this is just one guy's memoir,
Mm,
and he gets things wrong. So there's this sort of famous passage in it where he talks about people were so starving in Naples that they ate all the fish in the Naples aquarium, this world famous aquarium.
mm,
And they just ended up emptying it, eating all the fish, and until there was nothing left. And in fact, even the sort of prized possession of this aquarium was the manatee, which was then sautéed and served up to Mark Clark in a banquet, um, because he liked fish. Well, this is entire nonsense. None of this
yeah.
happened. This was originally in a novel by Malaparte called The Skin, and it was kind of a satire on some of the reporting of Naples at the time.
Yeah.
And somehow it got into the sort of Neapolitan consciousness, and then that sort of somehow weaved its way into Norman Luce's memory, and he remembered it as a fact, when in fact it was just only ever a story in a novel. So you're always turning up these myths along the way. That's one of them.
And how do you think that the Allies will be? How do you think that they were remembered at the end of the war, and how do you think they're remembered now?
In Naples or
Yeah,
more
yeah,
generally.
Naples. Well, Naples and Italy,
Yeah,
especially
I mean,
Naples.
look, in the people of Naples had a funny relationship with the Allies
Mm,
at the time, because they sort of loved them and hated them at the same time. It was both a liberation and an occupation at the same time. So you got all these strangers in your midst, but they're not like
mm,
the Germans. They're not blowing everything up. They're here to having a good time, and they're friendly, and they're spending money, and they just they just want to have a good time and make friends.
mm,
So the Neapolitans take them for everything they can.
mm,
They try and fleece them of as much money as they can, but they got a sort of soft spot for them at the same time,
mm.
and that kind of there was a sort of friendship really which grew up. I mean, there was American culture came to Naples in a way that it never had done before and was embraced. And you have all these sort of pop songs after in the 50s and 60s. Tu vuoi l'americano, l'americano, l'americano. So they were embracing all this sort of Americanisms in the country. In Italy, more generally, there is also the same sort of feeling that the Allies came to liberate the country.
Yeah.
Mussolini was a disaster. He took them into a war that he didn't need to, and as a consequence, Italy was destroyed. Um, but the Allies were there to liberate them and give them back democracy, and the fact that they destroyed a lot of the country along the way, they sure
Yeah.
liberated the hell out of that place, as one guy put it. Um, they were at least doing it with good intentions.
Yeah.
So
And
there's
how
a mixture of feelings there.
how are they remembered now? With warmth or
Yeah, mostly with warmth, I think.
yeah,
Yeah, mostly with. I mean,
that's good.
there's a little bit of resentment over, American culture kind of taking over when Italian culture should be the main thing.
Mm,
But I mean, in general, I don't think there's any more ill feeling towards the Americans in Italy than there are in anywhere else in the world, I suppose.
yeah, I've been to Italy and I've been to Naples, and they're very proud people, the Italians, aren't they?
Yes,
Very
yes.
proud people.
And Neapolitans are very proud of Naples as a separate part of Italy,
Yeah,
not just Naples as Italy, but Naples as because for hundreds of years Naples was its own kingdom,
yeah.
and there's a proud memory of that too.
And finally, what is the one thing you hope that readers take away from reading Naples 1944?
That war doesn't just stop on the front line.
Mm,
And just because an armistice is signed, it doesn't mean that the consequences aren't dire and don't carry on for months, if not years afterwards. And the societal breakdown which happened in Naples in those years is a lesson to all of us. And So when you're, reading your news reports about Gaza or whatever, have a thought to that and remember that, even with a ceasefire, this is not something that's going to come to an end anytime soon. It's going to be years and years and years of suffering.
Very well said. Keith Lowe, thank you so much for joining me today. And this
Thank
book
you.
is awesome. I'll put a link down below so that you can find it. Definitely read this. It's not a widely known story, and this is very, very well written. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.